I want to welcome everybody to the 7th annual of the Conferencias en Flor, hosted by Provino, Baja California. This is our 3rd year at Very Good Food and collaborating with them to create these special editions of our Future Thought Leaders panels. This is our 15th panel, which we've done in conjunction with UCTV, which is the platform for the University of California. So today, it's Earthworks, the cultural evolution of farm workers. And the theme matches perfectly with the theme of this year's Conferencias en Flor, terreno, terrain, terroir, right? Identidad, identity, and vocación, vocation. The land itself, the identity of the people engaged in the creation, in the farming, in the work, in the labor, in the production of the food and drink that's produced in this community and from all of Mexico into the United States, because we'll be talking about this issue about both sides of the border and in cross-border ways. And vocation, this is sort of the passion and the energy of the people engaged in this work who came to this because it's part of their heritage, their history, their culture. And we're going to talk about history, tradition, cultural practices, and yes, migration. Of who grows the food that we all eat and who grows the grapes that make the wine that most of us drink. And I count myself among it. I want to give a special thanks to Yolanda Celine Walter-Mead, who is the founder of This Is About Humanity, the co-founder. She has been performing a simultaneous translation, and will do that for part of this program as well. That is a very difficult task, so thank you, Yolanda. Her organization also sponsored today's panel to make it affordable and available to all of you, so I thank you for that. I'd like to thank again CETIS University here in Ensenada, and specifically CEVIT, which is the enology school here that we're currently in, this amazing facility. I would also like to thank our friends at Solar Rain for providing the water for today. They are the only desalinated ocean water, bottled water in North America. And they do it with solar power. And just even to make it a little bit better, they don't return the salty brine to the ocean. They use solar power further to cook that and make salt that they sell to restaurants. So this is like a model for sustainability and success. So thank you, as always, to Solar Rain. And of course, I would like to thank again Provino for inviting us to participate in this programming for the 3rd year. I hope this collaboration continues. We're very honored to be a part of it. Now, let's introduce our panelists. On my far right, we have Gualberto Solario Meza. He's the CEO of Heirloom Farms and president of the Agricultural Council of Baja California, representing over 120 growers and 120,000 farm workers. He represents the 3rd generation of farmers devoted to agriculture since 1937. And as you said earlier, your family originally comes from Michoacan, which is a theme, that we'll have today. We're in close quarters here. I love this. Yeah. A theme that will come up today a bit more. Next, we have David Bacon. He is a California-based photojournalist, social activist, and union organizer who spent 2 decades as a factory worker and organizer with the farm workers and the garment workers, and has written several books, including one that he has with him today, and some of the photos were featured earlier, In the Fields of the North, published by UC Press. On my right is Danielle Nierenberg, but Danny Nierenberg, who is the co-founder and president of Food Tank, which is a nonprofit organization focused on building a global community for safe and nourished eaters. Danielle has hosted panels like this all across the United States and around the globe. And I believe your next stop is
London,
and then
Barcelona.
And
then I'm not sure. I have to look at my calendar.
We're happy to have her here. She landed late last night and has to leave right after. So we're really pleased to have you and appreciate your energy in being here. On my left is Hans Bakov Guerrero. He's the CEO of Montechanique Winery, which is the third largest winery in Mexico. He was the president of the National Mexican Wine Council from 2019 to 2023, winner of over 500 international awards for your wines. That's pretty impressive. Montechanique is, in fact, one of the leaders in sustainability here in the Valle. And as we learned in your presentation before, and I know we'll hear again on this panel, that your investment in the community isn't just limited to sustainability practices related to the soil and the earth and the water, but in fact to the people that grow the products that you create, and creating and generating community and opportunity and education for them. And I think that will be a part of today's conversation. And so I appreciate the work that you do. Next is Alberto Garcia. He is an associate professor of history at San Jose State University, a first-generation scholar of the UC system. He's an author of the UC Press publication, Abandoning Their Beloved Land, which is an essential new history of the Bracero program, a bilateral initiative that allowed Mexican men to work in the United States as seasonal contract farm workers. He is also a first-gen scholar and a first-gen author. And I think that's a really important thing in terms of supporting diverse and unique voices in terms of academia and publication. And so his book is fantastic. For those of you in the room, there are copies on the table. For those of you online and on UCTV, you can order them at UC Press, as well as David's. And last but not least, we have Dr. Benjamin Gonzalez O'Brien. He's a professor of political science at San Diego State University. His main area of research is racial and ethnic politics with a focus on U.S. immigration policy. He's the author of Handcuffs and Chain Link, Criminalizing the Undocumented in America, and Sanctuary Cities, The Politics of Refuge. And your books are available
through the University of Virginia Press for Handcuffs and Chain Link, and Oxford University Press for Sanctuary Cities.
And you're also the publisher of a journal.
I'm also the editor of the Cambridge published Journal of Race, Ethnicity, and Politics.
And that's available online?
That is available online.
Okay, excellent. So these are the amazing people that were here to talk to you today. My name is Michelle Ciccarelli-Lurac. I'm the founder of Very Good Food. I'm also a member of the board of UC Press, which is how I have access to such amazing academics and authors. And I thank you, UC Press, for that. And I was an executive producer of Kiss the Ground, which is a film about regenerative agriculture and sort of the role that we can all play in making this a better planet. And that fundamentally is the theme of all of these panels, these future thought leader panels, which again, we do host and house on the university's platform, in part because our objective is to inform, to engage, and hopefully activate young, bright minds to use those skills and that knowledge they're going to gain in the university context to make this a better world for all of us. And that takes us back to the topic of the day. Now, you on TV didn't get the chance to hear the initial presentations that everyone made, but I want to see who's sort of raring to go. Who wants to start to talk a little bit about, we're going to start with the history of who the farm workers are, where people come from. You want to give that that's your sort of era.
Sure. So hello, everyone. So as Michelle mentioned, I'm a historian of Mexico. My research has been about the Bracero program, which was an official initiative, bilateral initiative, that was the result of an agreement between the Mexican and the U.S. governments. And it allowed Mexican men to work in the U.S. as seasonal contract farm workers. They were known as braceros. Bracero is an old Spanish word for somebody who works with their arms, with their brazos. And the program began in 1942. The last year of the program was 1964. Some 4.6 million total contracts were distributed during those 22 years. Braceros could receive more than one contract during the life of the program. And so historians of the Bracero program estimate that 4.6 million contracts, probably 1 to 2 million men who migrated as braceros. And at least 45% of those braceros were from 5 states in central Mexico. States of Aguascalientes, Guanajuato, Jalisco, Michoacán, and Zacatecas. States that during the middle decades of the 20th century and even today represent a little bit under 20% of Mexico's total population. So about 1/5 of Mexico's total population was sending half of the braceros to the US. And then if you look at post Bracero program immigration, at least in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's about the same. Close to half of Mexican immigrants who were living in the U.S. in the late, at the turn of the 21st century, were from Guanajuato, Jalisco, Michoacán, Zacatecas, Aguascalientes. Many of them, the younger relatives or acquaintances of former braceros who knew where they could go in states like California or Texas to find work. They're farm workers, many, from Guanajuato, Jalisco, Michoacán, from these states. Many of them either worked on private estates. Many of them had been beneficiaries of the revolutionary agrarian reform in Mexico. They were ejidatarios, worked in staple grain cultivation, so maize, wheat, also in livestock farming and livestock raising here in Mexico as well. Many of them also conservative Catholics. This is a region of Mexico, those states that Carlos Monsiváis, cultural scholar, cultural critic, cultural commentator of Mexico, he referred to it as the Rosary Belt. And so that even in a very Catholic country, these states were seen as being exceptionally Catholic. This was the epicenter of the Cristero War, the Cristero Rebellion, a conservative Catholic uprising against the revolutionary state in the 1920s that continued into the 1930s. And so many of these braceros were themselves conservative Catholics, culturally conservative Catholics, farm workers, but culturally conservative Catholics. Many of them belong to Catholic nationalist political parties like the Partido de Acción Nacional, the Unión Nacional Sinarquista. In fact, Ernesto Galarza, a Mexican-American labor organizer, during the 1940s visited Bracero work sites or housing sites. He visited them alongside Manuel Gamio, a Mexican anthropologist, student of Franz Boas, the father of Mexican anthropology. And Galarza was aghast to find that many braceros were active sinarquistas, that they were reading, these conservatives, that there were these conservative Catholics. And so for him, and he wrote a report for the president at the time was Manuel Avila Camacho. And he's like, so who exactly are you sending to us? This was like an affront to Galarza's sensibilities as a progressive labor organizer. But anybody who knows these states would not have been surprised that, okay, yes, you're going to have culturally, socially conservative campesinos, though. Like, they are campesinos, they were people who worked the land, but because of the history of the Catholic Church in those states that dated back to the colonial period, because of the impact of social Catholicism, the doctrine of Pope Leo XIII, which a lot of people are now learning about because of Pope Leo XIV, very culturally, socially conservative, but they were campesinos,
One of the things that I think is interesting, your work clearly focuses on the people, the Bracero program, the people who cross the border. But you discussed a little bit earlier, your own history, your family comes from Michoacán, and that is one of the states from which many, many people come. But it isn't just across the border that people come to this part, to Baja. And I want to ask you a little bit about that, because you talked about that, both your own history as well as the people that work with you and for you, and that you represent.
Talking about immigration in Baja California is talking about three states from Mexico that represent the 80% of the labor that we have now. It's Chiapas, Guerrero, and Oaxaca. Why? Because there's a 3 states more poor than Mexico. There is no labor in that states. And the 80s, that all workers coming to work to Baja just for summer, and was working here for 6 months, 7 months, and they moved to Sinaloa, and then they moved to other states in central Mexico. But how the technology changed everything, because when you bring new crops that you can grow something in the winter, like the strawberries, that people find that they can grow tomatoes in the summer, then they harvest the strawberries in the winter, and after years and years, the people is staying in the communities. Now, in the 80s, 80% was immigration from central Mexico. Now, just 20% of the people's coming from central Mexico that stays to work. And that's why we have a big community right now in all San Quintin, Maniadero, that represent 80% of the people that we have in the communities. And it's
They're staying.
they're
People who-
staying there. You know, they are demanding for public services. They are demanding for child care. They are demanding a lot of infrastructure that the government need to bring to the communities. And that's the big challenge that we have right now in the agriculture communities right now.
And that's consistent too with your own experience in terms of who works with you and whether they're residents, permanent and or temporary workers, but it has changed in that same way, correct?
Definitely. I mean, we have around 65% of our workforce is permanent, and that's because we during the whole cycles we need very specialized work that has to be known already, and that's why we invest so much in training more than 2,000 hours a year, trying to make people like better at what should be done in a precise moment, because viticulture doesn't wait. It has to be done at that time. So we've managed to have a lot of those people stay in the same community, and that's why we're trying to do like that circle around, to close that part that people would like to stay there and would like to have a life there. And then it's become sort of a generation towards generation. So the grandfather with the father and the father with the kid and the son. And then, we're helping them, to go and to learn more and to put them in school and for them to have better knowledge of, what that tradition in viticulture was.
Yeah. And I would love to hear from anybody who wants to sort of comment. We can talk about sort of where people have come from, and then over time, they've, just like most of us have moved somewhere or another in our lives, have come to stay. But I'm interested also in sort of the culture that's maintained both in the new communities, wherever that may be, if it's this side of the border in Baja or even across the border, and also that connection with the past of the communities they may have come from. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about that?
I can. I know. I mean, I mentioned right now that many of the Braceros and then post-Bracero immigrants, at least those in the United States from Guanajuato, Jalisco, Michoacán, Zacatecas, very Catholic, a very conservative Catholicism. It's still the type of Catholicism that is practiced in those Mexican immigrant and many Mexican immigrant and many Mexican American communities in California. And in fact, I recently went to a funeral rosary, went to a funeral reading of the rosary for the funeral. And the very last thing that the reader of the rosary said was, "Viva Cristo Rey," long live Christ the King, which was the rallying cry of the Cristeros. And in fact, in a lot of these Catholic parishes in California that are predominantly Mexican immigrant or Mexican American, a lot of the priests still will say that. Viva, there's even now, and now next year will be 100 years that the Cristero War began. But, the idea that you can still say Viva Cristo Rey, and that is still something that will resonate with these, devout Mexican immigrants in California, and then, children, grandchildren, Mexican Americans, and again, but that is something that, again, if you go back 100 years to rural Michoacán, rural Guanajuato, you're hearing the same thing, and you're still hearing that. And it's those echoes, that part of the culture that has endured for now a century.
As you were saying, Alberto, in terms of the demographics of the people who are the workforce here in San Quintin, increasingly, that's also the people who are the workforce in California, in Oregon, in Washington. And I've learned a great deal being part of the Frente Indígena and, as a North American. And one of the things that has really struck me, a couple things. One is that people come from the same community. So if you are born in San Miguel Cuevas in Oaxaca, and you come to San Quintin, you can live in a community of people who come from San Miguel Cuevas. If you go to Fresno or you go to Bellingham, you can live in a community. So it's like one community of people, but it's just located in different places. And so migration isn't just one individual person deciding on their own to go from here to there, but it's a whole community that's involved in a process of movement. In the U.S., the thing that I kind of knew and understood easily in being involved with this community was the insistence of people on their rights as migrants. We want equality, we want good wages, we want labor rights, we want political rights, we want to be on an equal level with the people who are in the community around us. But what I learned in the Frente Indígena is that the people in this organization, and it has chapters in California, it has chapters in Baja California, and it has chapters in Oaxaca, is that they actually have a conception of two rights that are linked together. And one is the right of migrants, the right to migrate, the right to equality, but also the right to not migrate. And that was a revelation to me. And actually, if you'll allow me to do this, the two people who were the founders of the Frente Indígena will become very close friends. One of them is a profe at UCLA, Gaspar Rivera Salgado. And the other was, he's no longer with us, was Rufino Dominguez, who you see in the photographs. So I want to just sort of say what they say because they do it much better than I could just summarize. So Gaspar says, we need development that makes, and here he's speaking about the debate that took place in the Frente Indígena about the right to not migrate. So he says, we need development that makes migration a choice rather than a necessity, the right to not migrate. We will find the answer to migration in our communities of origin. To make the right to not migrate concrete, we need to organize the forces in our communities and combine them with the resources and experiences that we've accumulated in 16 years of cross-border organizing. Migration is part of globalization, an aspect of state policies that expel people. Creating an alternative to that requires political power, and there's no way to avoid that. And so Gabino Cue, when he was elected, appointed Rufino Dominguez as the director of the Instituto Oaxaqueño de Atención al Migrante. And so Rufino, his response was to say, because he was having to talk to young people in Oaxaca who were considering coming to San Quintin or considering, especially coming to the United States because of the, tremendous difference in the income. And so he said, we want to show young people the reality of work in the North so that they won't have illusions that life is easy there. While migration is their right, and we'll fight for their rights as migrants, we want them to think of having a future here. Our starting point is to understand the need for economic development because the reason for migration is the lack of work and opportunity in people's communities of origin. If we don't attack the roots of migration, it will continue to grow. We have to have economic development and respect for the human rights of migrants as they come and go. So I thought that was an incredibly eye-opening to me analysis of what migrants themselves, how people look at their own situation and what they want.
Well, because we're talking about it sort of from the perspective of the places people migrate to, and you're bringing up a very important point, which is what about the places people are coming from, why they're leaving to begin with. Anybody else want to comment on that? I have a feeling you have something to say on this topic, but either of you want to chime in on the issue and you can talk about it not just from a North American perspective, but obviously from a global perspective as well. This is very similar commonality.
From my understanding and from what I've heard and seen around the world is people usually don't want to migrate. They migrate because of environmental reasons, economic reasons, social reasons. They migrate because they have to, not because they want to. And then we punish them for it. And I think that is something that we need to look at as humanity. Like, why do we do that? Why do we punish people for being forced to leave very terrible circumstances and looking to find a better life elsewhere? How do we change that sort of mindset of why we're blaming them and shaming them?
Well, and also we can't leave out the part that we're enticing people to come with the offer of opportunity, and whether that opportunity comes with risks, as I'm sure you have much to say, but also, just the notion that we in the North, I should say, we have needs that need to be filled that aren't being filled by our own communities, and therefore we create intentionally opportunities and seek the people who migrate, and then, as you said, demonize them for the very acts and the necessities that we've generated.
Right.
And I feel that might be a lead into you.
Yeah, so in the context of a lot of the U.S. migration, and what's occurring alongside the Bracero program, of course, is waves of undocumented entrants, right? So alongside the Braceros that, to a certain extent, are being accepted into these communities, there's this disjuncture because certain communities are celebrating the arrival of Braceros, but at the same time, you have large-scale enforcement operations to remove undocumented immigrants. And no one wants to go to the United States to be undocumented, particularly as any kind of migration has become more difficult. One of the things that we often ignore in discussing the quote-unquote problem of undocumented immigration in the United States is that our own policies have locked more and more people inside the United States. Many people who previously would have been migratory.
Yeah.
They would have returned to, their communities. Even if they entered illegally, they would have come, they would have worked, they would have gone back to wherever home was for them. But as we've militarized the border, as we've increased the punitive nature of immigration policies, it becomes more and more costly for people to get into the United States without documentation, and it becomes incredibly costly to leave because you might make it in this time, but next time you may get picked up by the Border Patrol or you may get picked up by ICE. And so the cost to yourself or your family may be great. And so more and more people make the decision to stay. And we had an amnesty program in 1986, right, that extended legal status to millions of undocumented immigrants. But what's often ignored is what happened alongside that was a significant growth in the size of the Border Patrol. And that helped to de-incentivize the return home because the likelihood of getting caught increased. And the more that we embrace policies that don't acknowledge the fact that many people do want to go home.
Yeah.
There are certainly people who would, who want to go to a country and want, to another country and settle there. But many people have attachment to their home country. They have attachment to their, where they live, not only through the people, but through their culture. And so if we create a way for that labor to be exchanged between countries, then we create an opportunity for people to come and to meet labor needs of countries when they are needed, and then to return home to their families, to return home to their communities, and not to be labeled as illegals or or criminals in the United States, and have to live in an environment where they're afraid to go shopping, they're afraid to take their kids to school, and if they have a mixed status family, now their children are citizens. Their children can move somewhat comfortably in those spaces, but their children internalize the fear of their parents because they have to worry about graduation. They have to worry about going with their parents to the grocery store. And that is because that is a problem that we have caused, right? Because of the choices that we have made in the United States historically.
It's an irony, isn't it, that the hardline policies generate more of the very thing they are purported to object to. And the flip side is that while people who used to come and go and do seasonal work, they came for jobs, they came for work, quite frankly, that we wanted them to fill. And now they stay for all the reasons you said. But there's also that negative effect that staying is happening on those home communities. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment, because I've read a lot, for example, about how Michoacan and other communities have changed dramatically with the loss of the men that have stayed. And now the families it's raised by a mother without the father, and what that does, and what that does with the young boys who are left behind. And I don't know if anyone has any comments on sort of that, the flip side of that same dynamic.
It's important that people have the ability and the right to choose for themselves what they want to do. So if people coming to the United States want to come for a while, work, and return home. That's fine. But in reality, also, many people come to the United States and want to stay, especially as you get married, you have kids, you want to become part of the community that that we have. You know, Sonny Perdue, who was the Secretary of Agriculture under Trump the first time, said that he was in favor of what we call the H-2A program, which is the modern day Bracero program, because it was only temporary, that people would never settle down and become part of a community in the United States, that they would only be used for their labor and then they would have to go home. So, and today what we have is, you know, in part of what the Trump administration is doing is not just conducting immigration raids and deporting people, but also trying to make the use of the H-2A program more and more attractive to employers in the U.S. so that the number will grow. So this is not a situation in which people are able to choose whether they want to be a part of a community or not. This is one where basically the U.S. government and those people who make the economic decisions are saying, you're only valuable for your work. And I think that really it's important for the people who are coming and going or coming and staying to be able to say what it is that they want. Just like in their people's communities of origin, people need to be able to say, well, yes, if you want to go, that's your right. You know, good luck and send money some home, hopefully. But also that if you don't want to go, that there's a future here. And it's not just you're forced into the migration, but that you can choose whether to come or whether to go.
Anyone else on?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the H2H program, how now it's impacted our communities
Here.
in Mexico. The H2H program, it's 6 months of the year. And it's a very restricted program. And there's a age to fill the requirements to be part of the program. And I want to put an example for the strawberry crops. A harvest in the strawberry are harvest around 80 boxes of strawberries a day. And the average people around are harvesting 35 boxes a day. All the guys that are harvesting 80 boxes, they are moving for 6 months to the United States. And the average that you have now in your field is just guys that can harvest 35 boxes. And the impact in your financial situation, social security, that's mean you need more people to harvest your fields. And when these guys or these people are coming back for the 6 months, they have enough savings to not work, or they work just once a week or 2 a week. And when I was talking with David, he's curious how you see your perspective in the H2H program that I was not seeing before. And it's because we are short in labor, and when this kind of programs leave you with not the worst people, but the people that they have less yields, that the people that are leaving, we are in a trouble.
Or even as both of you have said, that the better part of the workforce here now are permanent residents of this community. And when you lose some to the United States for these temporary programs, it's an interruption of your process as well. And they're going up, and then they don't have the right necessarily to stay and participate in government. And whether that's their choice or not, at a minimum, it's their choice to go up because the wages are better. But it's a very complicated process. What about you? You have an experience in what we're talking about here?
Yeah. I think that we've actually started working with MAVA, which is an organization in Napa that are Mexican Americans that have been living there and now generations. And we've been talking about bringing people back home and trying to do exactly the other way.
A reverse migration.
A reverse migration. So we ended up contracting a winemaker for a period of time that his parents went and did the whole travesty, and it was really emotional because he ended up coming back to Mexico and giving back part of all that experience that his parents passed through him, and now him as a professional winemaker, being very successful in the States, coming back and giving to Mexico. So for me, that was a very good example of something that we can do, of something that we can actually reverse, and that we should be more intentional in doing in a bigger way, So maybe putting Mexico's Council of Wine with, MABA, and just bringing people back home, and maybe actually just a cycle, of just making people more professional, to grab all that experience that everybody is taking into account, and they can go and come home and go back. That would be amazing, because really that would make us a much better, more integrated, because they're very very strong culture wise, so that doesn't disappear. That actually enhances if they're over there, and they want to come back, they want to give back, and that's part of what I think we should exploit more.
This is another example of the kind of brain drain. And here we're talking about a talent, expertise, skills, whatever they may be on the spectrum of people leaving in light of sort of the hardline, policies that we're talking about, and how, we can talk about how that affects the communities people are coming from, the places they might migrate to within Mexico, and then the places across the border. But now I am hearing, and I'm glad to hear you talk about it, sort of this reverse migration, and that here in Baja, that you're making more space and opportunity for people who are either choosing not to continue on, to come back, or even, as we understand, there are many people in Tijuana who've been waiting for for a long period of time to go further, who are coming back to find the opportunity here. And it's a wonderful thing to learn that there are, efforts to create more of those opportunities here in Mexico for people.
Yeah, and I think that those opportunities can also place pressure on the United States for policies that perhaps acknowledge that that allow for that choice, right? That choice of permanence. Because right now, because we do have such a large immigration, and because the visas are popular, the United States can perpetuate that impermanence, right? That impermanence that goes back to the very earliest years, right, of lawmaking on Mexican immigration and Mexican entry to the United States. And so that pressure and that acknowledgement of how dependent we are as a nation on labor from Mexico, right? That acknowledgement that this isn't us being, kind and letting people come in. We are absolutely dependent across multiple industries now on labor from Mexico, and not only Mexico, but also from Central America and from a number of countries. And that if you take that away, right, it will hurt us economically. And I think that the United States does need to learn that, right? Because we haven't been in that situation in the past, and we've been able to exploit the labor of immigrants for our own benefit without offering those individuals the option to become American citizens, or the same kind of rights that are observed for American citizens. And so I think that, that would be a good thing for us as a country to actually recognize. And I do know that during COVID-19, there were some narratives about that, right? That a lot of the people deemed essential workers during the COVID-19 pandemic were immigrants. Those were the people who were doing the most crucial labor to make sure that you could put food on your table, to make sure that when you went to the store there was food on the shelves, right? They were crucial. And then winds down a little bit, and we absolutely forget about that. And we pretend that if we could magically remove not only the 10.5 to 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, but cut off immigration entirely, that would actually benefit us. And it wouldn't. We know that based on birth rates, we do not have the capacity to support our need for labor in the United States. We will be reliant, and we will have to be reliant on immigrant populations to supplement American labor going forward, because birth rates are not turning around, they're falling almost every single year. And the more that happens, the more that dependency is going to grow.
Yes, please. No, go.
Well, I think there's something that, we might not be understanding here because most Americans don't understand how skilled migrant laborers are and they don't get it. And I think we continue. You're right about the essential workers. We quickly forgot about how essential they are. And I think we need to come back to some sort of understanding that these people have very unique skill sets that none of us probably on this stage have.
I can't do anything.
Right. and Hans and Alberto have been good at sort of, highlighting how the people who work with them on their farms are really skilled, but the rest of, the rest of the farmers I know in the United States are not really doing that. They're not acknowledging that. And I think there's something to be said for that because we're just ignoring, they didn't go to college maybe, but they have a skill set that none of us have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, and sort of, I think it's really important, this lesson that maybe needs to be learned about the nature of it. I mean, the data on who grows and prepares the food, that's true here. And it's certainly true in the United States. California is the #1 agricultural producing area within the United States. And we produce anywhere from 75 to 90% of the things that people eat in America, contrary to popular belief. That's already a fact that most people don't know. Right. Secondly, that's predominantly 3/4 or more by migrant labor, probably half of that undocumented. That's just produce. Then we can talk about those who veer east to other parts of the United States to do the meat processing. So, and that's the production end. And then we have the preparation and serving end. Essentially, I think it is fair. And I saw a great quote from Anthony Bourdain the other day. It's obviously an older quote, still just as true, which is no one eats in America without the kind of labor that we're talking about. And it isn't unskilled labor, as you said, it's highly skilled labor, and so we have to learn to respect that and to acknowledge that. I'm not sure we're in the right place at this particular moment, but we are going to be learning some lessons in light of the policies that are affecting. And we had these conversations with some of the people on the panel earlier, that people are making the decision, maybe it's not in my best interest at this moment to continue further north. Maybe the risk-benefit analysis isn't what it once was. Maybe I'll go just as far as Baja or other parts within Mexico, or maybe I'll stay home if opportunity permits me to do that. But there is a dynamic changing now, and we're all witnessing it. And I think this is essential to what we're talking about today. Anybody else want to chime in? Yeah.
One thing that also worries me as we continue to dehumanize workers and migrants and immigrants is that we are forgetting the women who are part of this story, the women who are working in fields or in processing plants, because they face different kinds of challenges than male workers for many reasons. One, obviously, is sexual harassment. Two, they have children that they need to support, and they are not able to do that always if they're in fear all the time. So acknowledging those kinds of things, the sexual harassment is huge. I've heard from Teresa Romero of the United Farm Workers and others how just widespread it is, and we continue to ignore it.
Well, not that. It's the H-2A program that we've been talking about. The recruiters who recruit for U.S. growers are legally permitted to refuse to hire women, which would be illegal if they were hiring people in the United States, but the law does not cover that. But I do have a question that I wanted to ask the two of you, and that is...
Take it away.
Okay. And this is me putting on my union organizer hat, I have to admit. But, people come to the United States to work, whether they, and the H-2A workers, or whether they cross the border without papers, because the differential in wages is so great. An hour of work in the U.S. fields, as terrible as that work might be and as poorly paid as it is still the equivalent of half a day to a day's worth of work in Mexico. And so I was talking with you and then with your father about the tariffs. So, if the tariffs get put on tomatoes and on strawberries from California, and the compensation that U.S. wholesalers make is to try and lower the price that they're paying in Mexico so that they don't have to raise the price to the consumer in the US. That puts a lot of price pressure on products that are grown here in Baja California. So the ability of a grower in Baja California to raise the wages becomes even more difficult. So given that that great differential really exists, though, and that's what's bringing people into that H2A program, what can be done in Baja California to get at that problem, to essentially raise the wages?
Let's acknowledge first that it's
Mexico.
very different between grapes for wine and tomatoes because the markets they have, but
Well, and not only that, I mean, let's be realistic also. I don't think that it's in the cards to be able to create a level playing field, So because the more the wages rise here in Baja California, the less incentive there is for people to come.
There's a lot that you can doing about it because from 2018 to 2025, the salary increase for the growers more than 300%. That's represent a lot for us, to be profitable. It's crazy how the salary increase. And when you are a woman that you have three child, and you don't have child care, you don't have water in your house, you have to pay rent. There's no enough money to cover that part. In average, in San Quintin, Maniadero now, we're paying 650 pesos average. 5-6 years ago was 300, 280 pesos. That is more than double that we are paying right now. And what we need more infrastructure in the communities. The community right now are paying the more expensive water in the world. 200 liters, 50 pesos. If you are coming to your house and you want to wash your clothes, and you're paying a lot of money. There's not enough money to cover the infrastructure that you have. And we are doing a lot of in ways in the last years, but there's a limit to be profitable in your company. I don't know if you want to share something.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Also, to add a little bit to that, it's also it's not only salary, it's not only, what you're compensating there, but it's also trying to create an environment for them to really have quality in work, quality in life and quality in work. So if we can work along that side, as a personal for the company and for the workers, that helps, but it's not enough because at the end everything is about being able to have and to afford the needs that need to be filled. So I think that the solution for that is it has to be something as a joint force, along with the government, the local government, so we can create these sorts of programs that can really, make sense, because by themselves, there's probably 20 companies that have a great way of work, but it's not enough. And people are not staying because they're not fully fulfilled until those necessities are as a whole, in regards to, where they're living, and whether if we manage to do that, maybe they won't even leave, maybe they will decide to stay. And I think it is very important to create those subsidizations, energy wise, water wise, and just create a better way of living and more affordable, because at the end we are not going to be able to solve that by ourselves.
You said that 25% of the people that work in Montejinic belong to a union.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, we decided to put in a very active syndicate. Why? Because we felt the need that we needed to have, the people realize, that what was being done, and somebody to be, that voice to them, and to be protecting of them. We did it ourselves normally, but once we joined with the syndicate, things are better, because at the end they're putting a part of it, we are putting another part of it, and the negotiations are important, because we understand that importance of having that quality of work and quality of life, and together we're able to give more to that personnel. So I think it's been a case of success. We're really excited that also gives us a good advantage, because there's not a lot of wineries in Mexico that are doing this, and I think that is something that we have to promote and not see it necessarily as something bad because now they're organized. That's not how it works. It's for us, it's just thinking on the workforce and for them to have a better way of life.
But I want to get back. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to add in union and sindicatos, and it's in the law. Now it's a lot of pressure, but Secretaría del Trabajo to take a vote to the people that they chose their sindicato, and it's exercises that I don't know if 90% of the industry right here is my directora, but a lot of companies right now are in sindicato, and on myself and Heirlooms, we are doing a votation, a vote, the people coming and they choose the sindicato, the rights, and it's something is under law, and you have to do it by law.
I want to get back to what was sort of a sub point that I think you were raising about the tariffs, because I think you said that maybe 20% of your product is sold in the United States. I could be wrong, but yours is probably much higher, whether tomatoes or strawberries. That is a very large percentage of the product exported to the United States. And how will tariffs affect that and ultimately affect the issue that we're talking about?
Yeah, specialty produce is 98%.
Yeah.
Of specialty tomatoes, strawberries. There's a market in Mexico, but it's not enough. And the tariffs, we was like a week paying tariffs. It was hard because we was paying a lot of money for that week, and there was not a refund. And it was curious because the industry, we was not prepared for that.
It was so sudden.
Yeah, everybody was asking who are going to pay it, the grower, the distributor, the end consumer, and we was ending pay the growers because there was a way to how to collect or go to Costco, Walmart and say you are going to increase the price. And we wasn't under discussion on how are we going to pay it. I want to bring the example of the bananas right now. They are paying 10%. And there's a video, a very viral video that Secretary of Commerce was in the Congress, and Congress asking to the Secretary how much are paying bananas, and he say are paying 10%. And do you know Walmart is already increased 8% the price of bananas? And they say yes, but if the growers grow bananas in the United States, they are gonna pay nothing. We cannot grow bananas in the United States. We can grow bananas, but at what price? It's illogical to trying to think in that protect way. And it's the same what happened in tomatoes. They want to protect the domestic industry, but there's no water, there's no labor, there is not environment like in Mexico to grow the tomato that we are growing. And now we are in a new negotiation in tomatoes about, we have a suspension agreement for dumping, and we are almost in 30 days to get in a new negotiation. If not, Mexican tomatoes are going to pay 70%. Who are going to pay it? We need to see, but they're going to pay the end consumer at some point, because like a grower, you cannot support that.
Because at the same time, the policies in the United States, and there certainly has been a lot of video and news reporting about it, but up and down California, there were, fields of fruit and other produce where no one was showing up to work for legitimate fear of what might happen. So the interesting thing is, I think the pressure gets put on you from the United States as long as they believe there's a U.S. supply. But as that U.S. supply is being interrupted, then they have to sort of reconsider. Let's just say it's complicated. Yeah, you look like you want to say something.
I was going to say something earlier about how in the absence of federal leadership or countrywide leadership, the private sector becomes more and more important on these issues. And the fact that you're, supporting workers and making sure that their wages are rising along with their needs is going to become more important than ever before. But that puts a lot of pressure on you because you had a government that was, 6 months ago amenable to a lot of things that it's not amenable to now. And that's a lot of pressure that you have to deal with. It's not a question, it's just an observation.
I want to go back to one of the points that Danielle raised earlier in regards to the ignoring some of the gender effects of migration. And I think one of the things that often isn't discussed enough when we talk about enforcement in the United States is that also has been demonstrated to have very gendered effects in terms of during the first Trump administration, we saw significant declines in reports of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and domestic violence, not only from immigrant communities, but from the broader Latino community. And we saw that in cities like LA, and police chiefs, spoke out about this, and they said this is very clearly tied to a fear that any report of any of this may either lead to removal of the person reporting it, or may lead to the removal of somebody's, if it's a domestic violence case, you may want that person to have some consequences for the violence, but if that's the father of your children, you may not want them removed from the country. And so all of that is often ignored when we talk about enforcement operations, is that while these are pushed by the administration as making communities safer, what they in fact do is they make communities less safe, because there are sizable immigrant communities in almost every large city in the United States, as well as a number of small towns across America. And if they fear calling the police for any reason, then those communities are not getting safer. And going all the way back to 1979, Daryl Gates, who is not known to be progressive on anything, he's the former chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. But in 1979, they passed an order prohibiting members of the LAPD from inquiring into the immigration status of LA residents. And Daryl Gates was later interviewed, and he said, this was just seen as necessary for police to do their job. If you make immigrant communities in LA fearful of the police, no one is going to report anything. They're not going to report crimes that they're a victim of. They're not going to report crimes that they're a witness to. And so you're making those communities less safe. You're ignoring the gendered effects of enforcement. And ultimately, you're not solving the problem at all, right? And you're driving people out of industries that you need people in, right? The number of stories of meatpacking facilities, of dairy farms, of all these areas emptying out because people are afraid right now of enforcement operations. We're hurting ourselves in the United States. We're hurting immigrant communities a lot more, but we're also, in the long term, we're doing damage to ourselves, because immigrant communities always have been part of the United States, right? They are ourselves. And so in doing that damage, we're hurting ourselves, we're hurting them, because we are so stuck on this narrative that the only solution to immigration is through either punitive policies or policies that refuse to acknowledge the historical relationships between countries that are connected and that have always been part of one another's history.
I think, I want to piggyback off of that, because enforcement or deportation raids or publicity to self-deport, in many ways, what the Trump administration is currently doing, there is historical precedent in the U.S. Yes. I mean, the repatriation campaigns of the late 1920s, early 1930s, in the immediate wake of the Great Depression. And then in 1954, during the Bracero program, there was, and the Immigration and Naturalization Service, this was their official name. I always have to explain to people, like, this isn't just like an unofficial name. Like,
I avoided that one.
I will say, I apologize because I am going to use the term, but it was literally called Operation Wetback. It was in 1954. And it was, okay, you know, there is undocumented migration that coincided with Bracero migration because, one, there were U.S. farm owners who were willing to hire undocumented Mexican workers. But then also from the Mexican side, I mentioned during my presentation that it was Mexican municipal officials who decided who would get the contract cards. Well, sometimes they wanted to do it in exchange for a bribe, or sometimes they're freezing people out. And there are oral histories of, you know, braceros who said, well, why, you know, should I pay my municipal president, you know, the mordida, the bribe, when I can just pay a coyote the same fee or even less, and, you know, he can get me across the border and that. So you have this mass deportation campaign. You had over 1 million apprehensions in 1954, but because with the Trump administration now, they want to have these mass deportations and then close the door entirely.
Yeah.
After that mass deportation campaign in the 1950s, the head of the INS said, okay, we're done. And now we're going to increase the number of braceros who enter every year.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, their goal is, okay, we want Mexicans coming as braceros, but we want them coming with the contracts. And then if you look, like, after 1954, you have 300,000, 400,000, you know, bracero contracts a year, whereas prior to that you had 100. And so that is one significant, you know, at least if we're looking at, you know, the Mexico-U.S. side of the equation, one significant change is that, yes, you had that, but there was never this idea that you're going to close the door permanently. And even after repatriation in the Great Depression, by the middle of the 1930s, like this is still during Franklin Roosevelt's first term in office, Texas and California farm owners are saying, okay, we need Mexicans back.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, we had repatriation. Okay, we did it, but the economy is getting better. We need Mexican immigrants back. And then, of course, the counterpart to that was, and especially to counteract people like Ernesto Galarza, who are beginning to organize Mexican-American farm labor unions. But this is one thing that is, I think, different. You know, the fact that the idea, it's not, okay, mass deportation, yes, but then we're going to close the door behind us. And not the idea that, okay, we're going to expel the undocumented and then give an opportunity, you know, for them to come back in the quote unquote right way. So that is, I think, a significant difference. And again, you know, also just make it back and also, you know, affecting men and women now, yeah, as well.
Well, I think actually that there were 384,000 people who were recruited under the H-2A program last year and more this year. And if you count the other visas as well, too, for other than agriculture, you have, you know, people, almost 1 million people a year. So I think that the Trump administration is going to open wider that door, you know, because this is a program that they want and they think that growers want it, and a lot of growers do. But I want to, but so we're not just sort of ending on a
low
note.
I was going to ask for final positive thoughts. Yeah.
One of the wonderful things that I have seen in the last few months is in towns like Santa Maria and San Mateo and Santa Rosa, is that there are marches, there are demonstrations, there are school blowouts. And it's all young people, and it's people, and there's a sign that, I have a picture of this one too, of a sign that somebody is carrying in Santa Maria in a march that says, "We are fighting for those who fought for us." So it's like young people defending their families. If my mother and father can't come out to march, we are going to go out and march for them because we are not going to take this lying down, and we are going to defend our rights. And to me, that's a very, very hopeful.
I'm glad you started. This is literally where I was going, which is I do want to end, and we're going to do Q&A after, but I do want to end on that. And if anyone sort of has any final sort of positive thoughts or, you know, hopeful thoughts for the future. We went back and forth on this dialogue. Is it a time to be concerned and depressed? Concerned, possibly depressed intermittently, but also is there hope? And this is one example of hope. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add sort of in the positive?
Yes, I think there's huge opportunity. And Dave and I chatted about this morning at breakfast. You have a lot of Americans who are concerned about health and wellness right now. And we could harness that if we did it effectively for them to be champions of migrant workers rather than the people who are part of MAHA, Make America Healthy. Again, to really use that as a galvanizing effort. We talked about the great boycotts in
Yes.
the 1970s. If you can get consumers to be eaters, to be that concerned about where their food comes from again in a really concrete way, that would be amazing. And I think there's opportunity there.
So I'm so glad you mentioned that. One of my other film projects was the Dolores Huerta film project. And one of the things I love most about that film is this discussion about, we tend to operate in silos. Here's a group focused on farm workers or migration, and this group cares about healthy food, and this group cares about women. But imagine when these groups actually come together, that's where change, that's why the beautiful thing of seeing youth in the street of from all different backgrounds. But this notion that we need these different groups to come together collectively, and that is the kind of change that can really move the needle. And in that instance, they got, sort of people from across the aisle to support the strike, and particularly after Reagan and Nixon made it tougher on the farm workers, they brought in the owner of a grocery store chain and the heiress here and the women's movement to come in and support and the Black Panthers. Everybody came in and around and said, like, we can do this together. And that actually is the message I love to bring to younger people, is the power of true collective action, not just in your silo. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of things that bring me hope, I think in addition to, the very high profile things that we've seen happening in cities like Los Angeles, there's also all these smaller, just spontaneous expressions of anger at what is happening to immigrant communities. We had an Italian restaurant in San Diego that was raided, and this wasn't there wasn't a big announcement. There was no planned protest, but there were people standing in front of the ICE vans. There were people demanding that those individuals who had their badges covered and their face, that they showed who they were. And I thought that spontaneity, right? That view that these were members of the community that were being removed. These weren't immigrants. These weren't, that had power. And that's what filled me. That's what filled me with hope. But also, I think one of the things that we're seeing with the administration now is that demographics in the United States are changing at a faster pace than they have at almost any other point in decades, minimally. The United States is finally becoming that true mixture that it was always, that was always part of our national myth. And part of the reason that we're seeing some of this far-right messaging be, successful, not only in the United States, but throughout Western Europe, is because nations are changing. And that change is going to happen. That change is going to come, regardless of whether Trump, removes, undocumented immigrants, regardless of whether they try to shut the door, regardless of whether they try to preserve the impermanence of the workers that are so crucial. That change is going to come, right? They're fighting something that can't be fought. They're trying to win a war that they've already lost. America will be a more diverse nation in 20 or 30 years. And with that diversity will come a different perspective on all these things, because that diversity is not just going to be the traditional diversity that America has gotten used to, right? European, diversity in European populations, but it's going to be a much more multiracial, multi-ethnic country. And I think with that will come its own set of problems, but also the potential to reimagine our future as a country and to reimagine our policies, because many of the individuals who are young in the United States now, who are the children of immigrants, they have grown up in this environment and they've seen what, the path that this has led us down. And I think that will be a driver of change in the years to come. I think that this is, for all of my tendency towards negativity, but for all of that, I think that there is my hope is really, and the optimism that I have is really driven by looking at American communities and seeing how quickly they're changing, how quickly they're diversifying, how amplified voices that were lost in past decades, how amplified those voices are now, and also how exposed the cruelty is. Because we know that exposing the cruelty can trigger something in people, right? This is what drove, this is what helped to make the civil rights movement successful, is that when you can no longer pretend that this is natural, when you can no longer pretend that this doesn't have a human cost, when you have to see it, that maybe makes you a little more hesitant to embrace it. And so that's where my optimism comes from.
Okay. We'll go down the road.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to follow that?
No, okay. Come on, Elva. You got
He
this.
said no.
I agree.
No, I mean, I want to, echo what Ben and David and others have said. I mean, I think one, today, Friday, June 13th, and so about a week since, events began to escalate in Los Angeles, on the U.S. side of the border. And again, the spontaneity of the response to it. And as David mentioned as well, young people in places in the Central Coast in California, like Santa Maria, or places in the Central Valley, like Bakersfield, Fresno, places that have historic Mexican immigrant, Mexican American populations as well. Younger people going out and protesting. I do think that I think what gives me hope is that I'm seeing, being here now in Baja California, maybe I also have a different perspective on this because so much of my time in Mexico has been spent in Michoacán, in Guanajuato, in Jalisco, in Zacatecas, in states where migration in many ways is almost seen as like it's a rite of passage. It's something that you do. I'm in my family's hometown in Michoacán. There are people who did return and who said, well, I tried it in the US and, didn't work out for me. And so now, I'm back here. And so, that resonated with me as well. But the fact that there are people on both sides of the border, not necessarily government officials, civil society, whatever term you want to use, who are aware of how interconnected the two countries are, and who realize that. I mean, again, sometimes we think, well, it's just Mexico, U.S., Mexico, U.S., U.S., Mexico, but who also realize, but no, it's also like from within Mexico to Baja California, and that, or to Sonora, and that, things like H2A have effects, and tariffs have effects. And so seeing how many people are aware of this, again, not necessarily government officials, but then you hope that perhaps through organizing, through protesting, that can then begin to trickle up. Sometimes it is very hard to dislodge government and officials from the opinions that they have, but it's possible. It is possible. But seeing how aware people are and seeing how there is this shared transnational space, for lack of a better term, not just the borderland itself, but I mean, I'm reminded of something that happened one time when I flew from Oakland in California to Guadalajara, and was a red-eye flight. So, I mean, it's only like a 3-hour flight, but it left Oakland at midnight and land. So I'm leaving Oakland and I'm staying in Guadalajara. So land, go through customs, get a taxi. And then we pull out from the airport onto the highway leading into Guadalajara, and we pull up behind a pickup truck that has an Oakland Raiders decal. And I just have this moment, and it's like 6 a.m. and I'm just like, wait a minute, where am I?
Where am I?
Yeah, but again, people, again, at least in those states historically, and then I think you see this in the border states as well, where people are like, no, it's not. I mean, it's Baja California and California together. We are interconnected, like Michoacán and California, Oaxaca and California, Zacatecas and Texas. These places are all connected. What happens in Chicago, which also has a historic Mexican immigrant, it's going to resonate in Guanajuato. What happens in Baja California will resonate in Napa, and I think more and more people are aware of that, and hopefully it can trickle up and change official. I'm hopeful that, that what we're seeing in the streets of Los Angeles, that it'll trickle up and that it will move officials on both sides of the border, because I think, the current administration, but I think sometimes too, Mexican administrations, federal administration, since the Bracero program, mean, oftentimes the immigrant community, it's just something that they can, oh yeah, yo defiendo al pueblo, I'm going to advocate for the people, for Mexicans in the U.S. And they'll say that, and then that's it. It's like, yes, of course we respect. I mean, what was it? The folks always said like, oh, the heroes, the Mexican heroes, and nothing really happened though. And so, but hopefully it can change the official opinions on both sides of the border.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead. No, maybe something to add. I'm really hopeful because once, like Ben was saying, that once you go back to understand what has happened in previous times, that it gives you the base of what the tendency is.
Yeah.
So that tendency is coming at a more quicker pace today than what happened before because of this multicultural diversity that is unavoidable, that is happening. So that that aspect of just not one person saying, I want to protest, I'm here, but now your neighbor, and your neighbor is, maybe he's not Mexican, but your neighbor is saying, hey, I'm with them, So that sort of situation now, along with communication, because communication at a broader point and making things very evident of what is happening and how it's happening, it's just a fire that it's gonna happen one way or another. You can avoid it. So you just have to find a way to understand it and to make it work in some point or another. So there's no fighting against that. So I think that's part of what I think is unavoidable, and it will eventually happen at some point. We just have to make it in a good way.
You wanted to go.
Yes, this is about people. It doesn't matter where it comes from, Central Mexico, Europe, it's just take care about your people. Everything that you have under control. Environment, take care about your people, because there's a lot of things around like a politics that we just to keep pressure to the government to create the best environment for that community, because it's people to people, and don't forget just that part.
Danny?
I already gave mine. We have an opportunity.
Yeah. No, and I want to say that what I'm seeing is I'm seeing these sort of small awakenings in the United States. It's starting with people realizing how they're being personally affected in a negative way. And that might be the first step. And what I hope is that that's the first step toward sort of a level of greater consciousness, and ultimately ending with what your point is, which we're really talking about humanity and treating people as humans, as human beings about whom we should all care regardless of origin and function and job. And so coming up with, your entire mantra of your organization, how do we make, the universe in which we operate, the work that we do, and specifically in the food arena, how do we make it a more equitable and fair environment? And we have to stop with the rhetoric. And I think, look, we're seeing that rhetoric today in the form and sort of the ferocity that we are, because the change that you all talked about, because the change is here, it's happening, and change is always fearful. I mean, for most of us, that's human nature. And so you get reactionary politics and policies in response to change, but it is happening, it is coming, and young people will lead that charge. And we're talking to all of you. This is why this is on UCTV. This is Future Thought Leaders. It's going to be your job to help change the future for a better tomorrow. Thank you for coming. Now, we do have the chance for questions from the audience, and we have, it looks like the beautiful Keiko with a microphone coming to anybody who wants to ask a question. Now, we've lost our translator. However, if need be, we do have enough sort of bilingual speakers that we'll try to, work our way through it, right? So if we can do it. Si se puede.
Hey, let's do it. My question is for Danielle and for the panel is, how do you expand this conversation, which was incredibly educational for me, to a greater audience? Like you were saying, uncomfortable conversations that weren't just within the industry. I'm in the seafood industry and we find the same issue. Is we're all talking sustainability to each other, and the public is kind of lost in the conversation.
It's such a great question. So something I've thought about since 2016. I clearly did not speak to the people I was speaking to when I should have been speaking to when Trump first won. And so part of what Food Tank as an organization has tried to do is seek out the people, honestly, who fundamentally disagree with me, to have those uncomfortable conversations that I spoke about before. We purposely invite different perspectives to all of our events. We have convenings on Capitol Hill where it's 50-50 Republican and Democrat participation. I was at South by Southwest earlier this year in Texas, interviewing Representative Sessions, who fundamentally disagrees with the person that I am, and we had a great conversation on stage. So where you can find those sort of little glimmers of like, yeah, I'm never going to agree with you on everything, but we are both people, as you said. We're both, human. And if we can find the humanity within one another, sorry, I'm getting choked up. If we can find the humanity within one another, we can change some of these problems that we're seeing, whether they're social, environmental, or economic.
Yes. I'm with you, sister.
So, I want to thank Very Good Food Foundation for putting this topic front and center, which is really relevant to our generation and the moments that we're living in. My question is, for the Bracero program, was there I've heard throughout my life that there's a lot of abuses toward the undocumented population. And my question is, with the Bracero program, was there like some improvements in the treatment of the Braceros in comparison to the previous treatment of the farm workers? And then I have another question from Hans. I heard that you mentioned that you're applying regenerative practices. How has that affected, or did you need to go through technical training for your employees or for the farm workers? Has that affected your costs and the impacts of regenerative on your farm workers? Thank you.
So in terms of treatment and abuses, yes and no. So on paper, braceros were supposed to be paid comparable wages to U.S. born workers. They were supposed to be provided housing. At least at the beginning of the program, they had 10% of their pay automatically deducted and deposited in banks here in Mexico. And the thinking was, we're going to make sure that at least some of the money gets back to Mexico. But oftentimes they were not paid what they were promised. They were provided housing, but it was substandard housing. And then when they got back to Mexico, they couldn't get their money out of the bank. It was, and so eventually they abandoned that. And actually, the Folks administration did actually finally pay that money out. So it wasn't until the 2000s. So the reason I say yes and no, though, is because there were some growers who did honor the contracts, and it did give braceros I have the paper, I have the contract. You had redress. You could go to a consulate. You could complain. It gave you the ability to complain, whereas Mexicans who entered as undocumented workers during the period didn't have that recourse, and would be cheated of their. And actually, you do have a wage hierarchy where even if contracted braceros weren't being paid the wages that they were promised in their contract, they were still being paid more than undocumented Mexicans during that same time. And the braceros, undocumented Mexicans, in theory, they could go to their consulate, but, the consul would say, well, where's your contract? Or why didn't you go through the program that? And so but you did have some level of redress, and you could get benefits. I didn't research this, but this is from a book called Corazón de Dixie by Julie Weiss that looks at Mexican immigration in the southern United States. And when braceros arrived in the Arkansas River Delta, initially local officials wanted them to say, okay, well, you are subject to Jim Crow laws, to the segregation laws. And so, you're going to eat in the segregated spaces for Black Arkansans. And the bracero said, absolutely not. We're not going to do this. And so they went to the consul in Memphis, Tennessee, and he basically said, okay, well, if you actually subject braceros to Jim Crow segregation, we're going to blacklist this state. We'll make sure that you don't get any braceros, and they caved. And so, it depends. So that's why I say yes and no. Yes and no. And then, of course, they were also subject to abuses in Mexico as well. They often did have to pay bribes to the municipal officials, or they had to pay bribes at the contracting centers as well. But still, many braceros in their oral histories, they'll talk about that, but they said, but at the end of the day, the contract did give us at least a level of protection. Even if it wasn't exactly what had been promised to us, we still had recourses that others did not have.
In regards to the regenerative agriculture, the weird part of it is that is how it has to be. It's how it's always been. The problem is that conventional farm, works are the ones that are really taking advantage of in a weird way, because you want to supplement something that you lack, and you're just breaking the circle, right? So when you go into the regenerative fact of your agriculture, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, you're scared at the beginning because you don't know if it's gonna be very efficient at the beginning, and that's just your hesitation at the beginning. But the reality is that it's immediate. So, for example, today I can measure the temperatures that are in the playing fields without the cover crops, and it's 15 Celsius, 50 Celsius, because there's sand and there's silicates, and that just reflects, and that soil is hot. Obviously, the deeper you go, the less that impact is. But if you just do the same and you measure that temperature in where the cover crop is, it's half of what you are getting there. So that is immediately in less water, more metabolism, because the roots need less. They're shocked, because if it's that hot, their metabolism is not going to be that well. So it's immediately, and your evaporation of water is like 30% less. So that's just to name one. But then you go, like, for example, on the wheat, right? You're scared because now there's more. We're gonna need more water because now the cover crops need more water. It's not true, because what happens is that the weeds will be suffocated, and you don't need to pass 2 or 3 times as you would need in the conventional one. So it's less cost. It's more cost efficient just on the labor work, on the water, and the biomass that you're creating at the same time with that oxygenation that you're creating in the roots of the same cover crop, eventually help you to use less fertilizers too, because you're giving back, you're breaking that down. And for example, we're doing 50% less fertilizer right now, just in 1 year. And regenerative is not, you won't see that result just in 1 year. You need several years. So that is what's going to happen. The potential of that is immediate right now, but what's going to happen in the future, it's amazing.
Yeah. And we didn't really get a chance, and I'm sorry I didn't ask you this before, but everything that you're doing isn't just, sort of efficient and better for the soil and water. It's also much better for the people who work in the field.
Absolutely.
I mean, in the United States, in conventional farming, the cancer rates for farm workers and other diseases are astronomically higher because they're being subjected to pesticides and herbicides and chemical-based fertilizer and all of these things. And so in addition to doing a better, job stewarding the land, you're also stewarding the people who work the land. And I think that doesn't get told often enough. So,
Yeah.
So,
next question, Fernando.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration has been selling the American public a very divisive agenda that have divided the country, obviously. Listening to all of you, all the different perspectives, makes me wonder if things need to get really bad soon to make realize the general population about all these immigration policies and tariffs, how the economy is going to be affected. Because one thing I understand in the United States is the economy. I mean, racial, yes, there's a lot of issues, but once it hurts your pocket, that is when you're okay, we shouldn't be doing this. Do you think it's going to get really bad in the next 3-4 years with all these things that are happening and people that even support those policies today will rethink, and it's like maybe this is not a good idea because of the economic repercussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the things that we know is that the thing that is one of the best predictors of whether someone's going to vote for a particular party to win the presidency again is the economy. If the economy is bad, if people are suffering, this is really what hurt the Biden administration significantly, right? Is people are looking at, we're looking at inflation, right? Things are expensive for me right now. Consumer products are more expensive than they used to be, right? The number of times that American news are running stories on the price of eggs kind of blew my mind. But I think that at the end of the day, if things do get as bad as they likely will as a result of tariffs, if people start having to pay higher prices for their products, if you wind up having to pay more money for produce, if you wind up having to pay more money for meat and dairy, that's going to have an effect. Now, will it have an effect on Trump? Probably not, because hopefully he doesn't get to run again. But I do think that will have potentially a long-term impact on the Republican Party, because I think fundamentally these policies will fail. This strategy has not been vetted by anyone, and all of the kind of economic predictions is that this is not going to lead to anything good. Now, at the same time, Trump and the other people in the top 1% are going to do gangbusters off of this, right? They're going to do really well. But the consumers at the end of the day, the public, is going to look back on this and probably do the thing that the American public does whenever they make bad decisions and go, why did we choose this guy, right? But at the end of the day, it's because they reacted to what he was selling, and also because to be honest, looking at the last election, the Biden administration and then, the Harris campaign never managed to find an economic message that resonated with Americans. Sure, Americans care about immigration, but not really, right? They care about immigration whenever it's making national news and there's a lot of noise on it. For most Americans who don't live in border states or border towns, they don't think about immigration all that frequently. What they think about is, how am I doing economically? And the Democrats didn't manage to capture that message, and Trump did by doing nothing really other than selling, I'm not that guy, right? I will do something different. And by the way, Americans had not heard of tariffs before this last election. Most Americans have no idea what a tariff is, how a tariff works, or anything else. So when you consider that, it sounds good, we're going to make other countries pay for all of this. That's what he sold the first time with the border wall, right? We're going to make Mexico pay, and people believed it, and then Mexico didn't pay, and we paid for it, these sections that were completed. And the same thing is happening this time, right? It's the American consumer that's paying at the end of the day. It's not really, the countries in question, because that all gets passed down, right? All those price increases get passed down. So I do think that pain, when it comes, is going to cause a reevaluation. But I do think that alongside that, we have to have a conversation about immigration more broadly in moments where it isn't crisis moments. Because we talk about immigration when it's moments like these, but then once it recedes a little bit, we stop talking about it.
Yeah.
And what that means is that the American public hasn't really learned anything, right? Because all of the noise right now is so polarizing, right? They haven't learned anything about the history of immigration policy. They haven't really thought about it carefully. And as a result, we need to have that conversation as a country, right? We need to have a conversation where it's dialed down a little bit, when it's not a moment of crisis. And when we need to do a better job of thinking and teaching about immigration as something that is important to politics. And I think maybe that this current administration will lead to that reevaluation, or at least I'm hopeful that.
I agree with you about the Democratic Party having lost the election, because it didn't really give a lot of working people something to vote for. Just, if you hate Trump, vote for Harris. But, I'm a child of the 60s. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I'm a lot older than anybody here. And the civil rights movement had a moral part to it that forced people in the United States to choose. Remember, this was the first time we could see on television what was happening, the fire hoses that were used against Black marchers, what happened to people being beaten on the Selma Bridge. And I think that although a lot of people in the United States didn't want to have to think about racism and think about Black people, they were forced to do it and they had to choose. And I think that most people in the United States at that time chose to be on the side of the civil rights movement. It didn't abolish racism. It didn't, there's a lot of things about the situation of African Americans in the US that did not change as a result of that. But some change did happen. And I think part of it was a majority change in how people looked at it. And it was a product of that crisis. So I think that when we see young people in the street marching for their parents, and when we see, ICE going after people in workplaces and David Huerta, the union leader, being, thrown to the ground, a senator being thrown to the ground in the press conference of, whatever her name, Noe. I think that it is forcing people to choose in the same way. So the more this goes on, I think the more it's a polarizing thing. So there's no guarantee that we are going to come out of this winning it. But I'm an optimist. And the other reason I think so is that I think the most effective organizers right now in the immigrant rights movement are churches. Those are the people we have marches in California now that go from detention center to detention center to detention center over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. And those are organized by church activists. So we're talking about people who are not necessarily motivated by their economic self-interest, but motivated by their vision of what kind of world they want to live in, really.
As you were talking, you made me think of sort of the mine workers' strikes and fights in the Appalachian region. And I remember this song, and it still resonates in my head. And the song is, "Which side are you on?
Right.
Which side are you on?" I mean, that's fundamentally what we're talking about. Like, people are going to see more and more. This is why photographs matter, why video matters, why the things that we're seeing, people need to get outraged and to question things they may not have questioned and find their common humanity again. Anyone? Any more questions? Si no. Okay. Everyone, thank you all for coming. Thank you for sitting through it. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I learned a lot. Thank you.